Hugh F. Gouldthorpe is a gifted motivational speaker, writer, and teacher in leadership, sales, marketing, communication, customer service, and organizational culture. He is the author of I've Always Looked Up to Giraffes and How to Make a Giraffe Smile, books that focus on leaders and organizations that stand head and shoulders above the group. Born and raised in Morganton, Virginia, he graduated from the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, Virginia, with a degree in biology and chemistry. Upon graduation, he entered the U.S. Army and was assigned to the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, where he helped train ROTC and West Point graduates. Upon completion of his military service, thank you, Hugh, he joined E.R. Squibb & Sons, where he held various leadership positions in sales, marketing, advertising, and training with the pharmaceutical giant. He retired from Squibb and joined Owens & Minor, the nation's largest distributor of medical and surgical supplies. He and his wife Nell purchased a home on Fripp Island in 2001 and then moved to Beaufort upon his retirement in 2010. He is very active in the community and has spent many hours, I know, on the foundation board of Beaufort Memorial Hospital, his church, and the Alzheimer's Society. At Owens & Minor, the CEO was referred to as the coach. Hugh was referred to as the head cheerleader. And I will tell you, Hugh is one of the most positive people I have ever met in my life, a huge positive force everywhere he goes. So Hugh, thank you for asking me to do this. And I'm excited about hearing your review of your book.
Yeah. Debbie, thank you so much for that nice introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your leadership at Beaufort Memorial Hospital Foundation. You have truly made a difference there, and everyone knows that. So I thank you. And I want to thank all of you for Zooming in today to hear my thoughts about a splendid, a pun intended, a splendid book entitled The Splendid and the Vile. I'm sure some of you have read this book and you know how good it is. And for those of you that have not read it, you are in for a real treat. Now, people always ask me, Hugh, why in the world did you pick this? Why in the world did you pick this book, select this book? We got it. We just had a little technical difficulty there. So, why did you select this book? And the answer is pretty daggone simple. Churchill is one of my favorite people to always read about. A real character, a military leader, a statesman, a prolific writer, and an author. Actually, he also won the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature. And you might not know this, but he's been selected as the greatest Brit of all time. He outlasted Charles Darwin and William Shakespeare. So he's pretty well known from that standpoint. But the second reason I picked this book was because of the author. Erick Larsen is a phenomenal writer. He has authored 8 books, all nonfiction. 6 of those books have become New York Times bestseller, including The Splendid and the Vile. And he's known, his most popular book, by the way, or one that you've probably heard of, is The Devil in the White City. And that's all about the 1893 World's Columbia Exposition in Chicago. This book won all kinds of numerous awards. Larsen, very talented, born in Brooklyn, New York, graduated summa cum laude from University of Pennsylvania, and got his degree in journalism from Columbia. So it's absolutely, he's a wonderful author. I've been asked lots of times, I've told so many people about this book, and I've been asked many times about where in the world did the title come from? How did he get the title for this book? It actually came from Churchill had a private secretary named John Koval. And John Koval had a very active diary. And one of the lines in his diary was, never was there such a contrast of natural splendor and human violence. He was watching the bombs fall on London, and that's where the quote comes from and the title for the book. Now, if I were naming this book, I probably would have titled it Downtown Downing. And the reason I would have done that, there are so many interesting characters at number 10 Downing Street and at Chequers, which is the country home for all the British prime ministers. It reminded me so much of all the characters at Downtown Abbey, which was, I'm sure many of you have seen that. There have been a number of unbelievable books written about Churchill, but this is not a typical Churchill book. If you're looking for a definitive account of Churchill's life, this is not the book for you. I would suggest you read Martin Gilbert's 8 volumes. That'll keep you busy for a long, long time. This book is about Churchill's family and his circle of friends and how they survived on a daily basis during the German Blitz of London. Larsen describes very vividly how life really was during Hitler's Blitz. Now, what makes the book so interesting? Well, it's pretty easy once you start reading it. Larsen's ability to reflect on the diaries, the original archival accounts, and the many, many secret intelligence reports, many of them just kind of recently released. What I'd like to do is to give you an example, some excerpts from the book, to give you a sense of how well Larsen writes. And even though these books are non-fictional, Larsen kind of, it's like, it reads like a novel. That's what kind of grabbed my interest in the book right away. Now, the first excerpt I want to read you is Churchill and his friend and his circle of friends and his family are going from number Downing Street to Chequers, or it's called Chequers Square. That's an old English manor house built in the late 1500s, where all of the prime ministers of Britain go on their weekends. They love to go to Chequers. It's about 40 miles northwest of London, and every prime minister since 1920 have gone to Chequers on the weekends. It's like when Eisenhower went to Camp David, which he named after his son David. Of course, a little different than Camp David, but it's a phenomenal place. It's the kind of place that they just love to go. Margaret Thatcher used to spend her Christmases at Chequers. But let me read this from the book, which will give you a flavor for Larsen's writing. The 3 black Daimlers sped through the countryside in fading light. Churchill liked to go fast. With luck and daring, his driver could cover the distance from Downing Street to Chequers in an hour. If he did it in 50 minutes, a feat that required running traffic lights and ignoring rights-of-ways, he won Churchill's generous praise. On one return trip, he was said to have hit 70 miles per hour. This in an age when cars had no seat belts. Churchill was invariably accompanied in the back seat by a typist, for whom the ride could be hair-raising. Wrote Secretary Elizabeth Lawton of a later experience. One would sit with a book balanced on one knee, scribbling hard, one's left hand holding spare pencils, his glasses cased, or an extra cigar, sometimes with one foot keeping open his precious box, which otherwise would have slammed shut as we swung around the corner. Shorthand was allowed only in cars. The rest of the time, Churchill's dictation had to be typed. Inspector Thompson came from Scotland Yard. He was actually Churchill's security guard. He came along as well, his anxiety rising as he approached the house, which he deemed an ideal setting for an assassination. Owing to the thoughtful gift of its prior owner, Sir Arthur Lee, the house, a large Tudor mansion of turmeric hued brick, had been the official country home of British prime ministers since 1917, when Lee gave it to the government. A police officer, even with his health and a revolver, could feel very alone there, Thompson wrote, and very, very unsafe. That should give you a little flavor of, even though this is a historical book, it reads very novelistic. Now, let me read you one other excerpt, which will I hope give you another sense of it. This is all about, you know, London was bombed a great deal. The countryside was bombed. And whenever the countryside was bombed, Churchill and his wife and his circle of friends would leave London and always go to the country, where Churchill would inspect the damage and talk with all of the people in London. So this is where this takes place. Churchill's visit was unannounced. As he drove through the streets, people turned to watch. First came recognition. Mary, that was his daughter, saw, then surprise and delight. Mary rode in the same car as Harriman, that's Averell Harriman, who Roosevelt had sent to work with Churchill. She liked him. He had the root of the matter in him, she wrote. He feels and works for us so much. The caravan moved past residents who stood in front of their newly ruined houses, examining the remains and retrieving belongings. Upon seeing Churchill, they came running to his car. It was unbelievably moving, Mary wrote. Churchill toured the worst hit areas on foot. He walked briskly. This was not the halting meander that might have been expected of an overweight 66-year-old man who spent many of his waking hours drinking and smoking. Newsreel footage shows him charging along at the head of his entourage, smiling, scowling, and now and then doffing his bowler hat, even executing an occasional snappy pirouette to acknowledge a remark from a bystander. In his long overcoat over his round frame, he looked like the top half of a very large bomb. Clementine and Mary walked a few steps behind, Clementine being Churchill's wife, both looking happy and cheerful. Pug Ismay, one of his secret circle of friends, and Harriman followed as well. Inspector Thompson stayed close with one hand in his pistol pocket. When engulfed by a crowd of men and women, Churchill took off his bowler and put it on top of his walking stick, then held it aloft so that those outside the immediate crush could see it and know he was there. Stand back, my men, Harriman heard him say. Let the others see. Harriman noticed that Churchill moved among the crowds. He used his trick of making direct eye contact with individuals. At one point, believing Churchill to be out of earshot, Harriman told Pug Ismay, the prime minister seems popular with the middle-aged women. Churchill heard the remark. He whirled to face Harriman. What did you say? Not only with the middle-aged women, with the young ones, but with the young ones too. That should give you a pretty good sense of the way that our author could really write. And one of the things that the author did was he went and looked at all the diaries of all the people he could find during that time. Mary, Churchill's daughter, her daughter gave him all of the the diary that Mary wrote. And then he got a lot of this information from Colville, Churchill's private secretary. And you'll find stories that were left out of some of the biographies on Churchill. They were left out because they didn't have time, they didn't have a place to put it, or they were too trivia to figure that out. Let me say one thing. World War II, as most of you know, spanned a number of years, but this book covers the time period from May of 1940 to May of 1941. England declared war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939. So this book starts 9 months later, and it starts the dramatic first day in May of 1940. On May 10th, 1940, that was Churchill's first day on the job. Neville Chamberlain had been the prime minister, but he resigned, and shall we say, he was not up to the task of managing a fast expanding war. Notice I said managing. He was more of a manager than a leader. Managing people is like herding cats. And if you can herd cats, you're pretty daggone good. You want to make sure that you're a leader, and Churchill was a leader. Although there was a lot of people thought, well, maybe we shouldn't we shouldn't give Churchill this job. Maybe he's not up to the task. That's where they were unbelievably wrong. Churchill. So think of your first day on the job. This is your first day on the job, and if you've ever been on a first day on the job, you're a little anxious. You want to make sure that things go right. You're a little nervous and so forth. But on the first day of the job, Hitler bombed Belgium and Holland. that puts a little stress on you. You need to think about that a little bit. And at that time, there were over 330,000 troops on Dunkirk. And Churchill had to figure out, should I take action and move ahead, or bring them back across the pond, and get them home, fathers and sons and brothers, and other children and families. And of course, as you know, if you saw the movie Dunkirk or read the book, he did work this wonderful system where he got all those 330 troops out of Dunkirk. So Churchill takes over on his first day of the job. He was such a determined man, but this showed right away what a big heart that Churchill had. Now, what follows is 600 pages, 101 chapters. Now, if you can read 250 words a minute, you can read this book in 10 hours and 26 minutes, if you want to read it straight through. But in this book of 600 pages, you'll find what life was really like during the year. You'll read about 57 consecutive days of bombing. This slide actually shows you, it's an old bookstore in the middle of London, and gives you an idea of what the bombs caused, because 57 consecutive days, they bombed and bombed and bombed. And so as you read in these 600 pages, you'll get some wonderful descriptions of how this happened and what was going on. I think the amazing thing that happened during this time was that life with the British people kept going. They went to church, although they took the gas mask with them. They went out to eat at night. They held their jobs during the day. When the sirens went off, they went down into the shelters. So life was pretty daggone the same. But a lot of that was attributed to Churchill, and we can talk a little bit about that. Churchill, the other thing you'll read about during these 600 pages, Churchill had 5 children. Diana was his oldest. Randolph was the second oldest, followed by Sarah, followed by Marigold. Now, Marigold died at the age of 3. She had tonsillitis, and then developed septicemia, and she died. And his youngest child was Mary. So what you'll find out in this book, the highlights mainly are on Randolph and on Mary. Now, Randolph was an interesting person. He was not a pleasant young man. In fact, his mother, Clementine, didn't like him too much. In fact, they didn't get along at all. He certainly didn't inherit his father's genes, or maybe, except for his propensity to alcohol. He drank all the time. He gambled away his money. He just gambled money all the time, and went to his father to get money. And his father always gave him money. He was always in debt, and didn't care much about it. He was a carouser. He was married, but had many, many affairs. And as you read the book, you'll get some interesting perspective on that. He had a beautiful wife named Pamela. And Pamela likewise, because he was having affairs, had affairs herself. But she loved Randolph, and she tried to help him. She never talked to anybody other than her private friends about him. He was in the army at the time. She had a son. She needed money. He would never send her money at all. So one of the affairs she had, which is kind of interesting in this book, was with Averell Harriman. And Harriman, again, had come from the United States, and Roosevelt had sent Harriman to work with Winston Churchill. Harriman was married, and they had this affair going on for a while. And then Roosevelt sent Harriman from London to another assignment. And then he continued to have affairs, and she did too. So, but something really fascinating about this is after the war was over, and at age 70, Harriman's wife had died, he married Pamela, and they lived for 17 years. He died in 17 years later, but they had a great relationship. So you'll read an awful lot. It's really fascinating to read about Randolph and Pamela. Now, the other thing you'll see, remember we talked about Chequers, it sometimes was called Chequers Square. So every weekend, Churchill and his family and all of the secret circle of friends, that number 10 Downing Street, they would go up to Chequers for the weekend, and lots of guests. Now, during this time, food was rationed a great deal in Britain, as it was all over, and Churchill was always over budget, always over budget. He just spent his money like mad, and absolutely loved to entertain. But the one good thing that was not rationed was wine, whiskey, brandy, and champagne. And he absolutely went over budget on that tremendously. And so you'll read about that and find it was great. The other thing that you will find fascinating, I think, about this book was his relationship with Roosevelt. He had a great relationship with Roosevelt. He nurtured that relationship, and you get a good sense as you read these pages that my goodness, he really worked real hard to establish this relationship. I could tell you lots and lots about this book at this point, but the one thing I'd like to share with you is that I want you to read this book. So I don't want to tell you too much more about it because it's pretty interesting, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Now, what are my takeaways and learnings from this book? Well, obviously one of my takeaways is that Churchill was a great leader, absolute leader. But what it got me thinking is that there's such a lack of leadership in the United States today, and actually all over the world. There was a great song one time entitled "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" And I guess my thought on this is, where have all the leaders gone? We have lost leaders. We see such a lack of leadership in our mayors, our politicians, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, our educators, organizations big and small, nonprofits, and you name it. Somehow, most of the day's leaders, or so-called, I'm gonna call them so-called leaders, they've forgotten that there's no right way to do a wrong thing. No right way to do a wrong thing. It begs the question, and I've had this discussion many years. Now, are leaders made and are leaders born? Some people feel that all leaders are absolutely born, and some people think, oh no, leaders are absolutely made. After having many discussions over the years, it's been my consensus that 80% of leadership is learned, and about 20% is instinctive or something that you're born with. You learn it from a mother, a father, a grandfather, a grandmother, a coach, a teacher, someone that you've learned. You learn what to do, and you learn what not to do. And in doing this, you make a lot of mistakes. There's no doubt about it. We all make mistakes. The only people who don't make mistakes are the people that don't do anything. And they're kind of, you don't want to get too close to them anyhow. The 20% instinctive, Churchill is a great example. Churchill was very instinctive about vision. Churchill was a great visionary. He could sense where he wanted to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. There's a verse in the Bible from Proverbs 29:18. It says, without a vision, the people perish. And there's a lot to that. Without some sense of where you want to go or what you want to be, you're not going to get there. And Churchill just had that great sense. So what do we look for? What do we look for in a great leader? What are we looking for in a great leader? First of all, great leaders have to be good communicators. They're open, they're honest, and they're very trustworthy. And that certainly defines Churchill. He was open, he was honest, he was very trustworthy. They understand that the 6 most important words for a leader is, I admit that I was wrong. Think about that. I admit that I was wrong. If you try to cover it up, it'll come back and eat you alive. It'll bite you. It'll destroy you. If you think back in the 70s, think about Richard Nixon. All he had to do was to say, can you believe that we broke into Watergate? That was the dumbest thing we ever did. That was stupid, right? We shouldn't have done that. And if he'd done that, he probably would have kept the presidency, but he didn't do it, so he lost the presidency. If Bill Clinton had said, no, I won't touch that. The five most important words for a leader is you did a great job. You did a great job. The number one need of people is the need to be recognized. We all love to be thanked for doing a great job. When you thank people for doing a great job, which Churchill did so well, you watch them smile. They feel like that they've made a difference. And when people make a difference or feel like they're making a difference, they make a difference. They reach things that they couldn't normally reach. So that's very important. And Churchill, when he went, we talked about this a little earlier, when he went to the bombings in the city, he always chatted with people. He always talked with them. Great leaders, LBWA, they lead by wandering around. They wander around and they talk with people and they ask people, what are we doing right around here? What are we doing wrong? What don't we have? What don't you have that you need that would make you a better leader? And that's important. Again, they feel like, gosh, this person is very, very interested in me. And Churchill, quite honestly, all the people in London, they felt they were going to win the war. They trusted him. They knew that with Churchill leading, that they could win the war. And that's a real talent to do that. So that you did a great job is very important. The 4 most important words for a great leader is, what do you think? What do you think we need to do? You want to put together a great team of people that believe in you. You ask them questions. What do you think? The best communicators are not the best talkers. They are the best listeners. Because when you listen to people, they exactly understand what to do, where to go, and how to do it. It builds teamwork, it builds camaraderie, and it builds that great trust that you're looking for. The 3 most important words that I think is, could you please? Could you please? It's how you ask people to do things. If you ask people to say, do that, if you asked me to do that, I'd have 2 words for you, and it wouldn't be happy motoring, I can tell you right now. So you'd ask people, could you please take care of that? Could you handle that? It's not what you say, it's certainly how you say it. And Churchill certainly had that way, understanding on how to do that. The 2 most important words for anybody, for any leader, is thank you. We all like to be thanked for a job well done. We like to make sure people know that we care about them. And Churchill was very great at doing that. He was great at thanking his staff. He was great at thanking the people of London for being so patient. It was so important. And one of the things that Churchill did, I brought a little prop here, which is important for later. This is my, if you can see, you can't see this too well. This is my 5-pound bag of sugar. And I brought this along to just remind me to tell you that Churchill never sugarcoated anything. He was right up front with people. He was always up front. He told them the good things, he told them the bad things, and they loved that. They believed that. So you should don't ever try to lie or don't try to slant things. That's not the way to do it. The most important word for a great leader is we. It's it's important that it's all of us that together we can accomplish what we have to do. You know, there's strength in numbers, and we is certainly adds to that strength. I remember and the least important word is I. I remember when I was working, I would get letters about people that wanted to come to work at our company. And I would read and scan the letters, and I would look at them and say, oh my goodness gracious. Um, I'd count the number of times that they wrote the word I, me, or my. And I had one time, I remember it was 54 times this person listed I, me, or mine. I would always take that resume or that letter and send it down to our senior vice president of people, because we had a senior vice president of people. And I would put a little comment on the letter. Methinks he protests too much. You know, if you're really good, you don't have to tell people 54 times that you're that good. When you meet people and talk with them, you'll find out pretty daggone quickly that they're really good at what they do. And that's important. So I think that's great. Now, there are three types of leaders in my book. I've always thought about that. Um, the first leader watches things happen, and I just kind of sit around and watch things happen. Well, I guess something will happen real good, and they just kind of idle and sit there and look at it. The second leader makes things happen. That's a Churchill kind of leader. Yeah. They listen to others, they energize, they act, and they deliver. They deliver on what they're talking about. So they make things happen. And the last leader, which you don't want to work for this particular leader, nobody would, are those people that wonder what happened. You know, they're kind of out of it. I used to say that if you put their brains in hummingbirds, they'd still fly backwards. And that's the only bird that flies backwards. So they don't get anything done, nothing whatsoever, nothing at all. But you want that leader that makes things happen. Now, what are the characteristics you want to look for in a leader? And these are great characteristics. You got to be a dreamer, reamer, schemer, and a healer. A dreamer, reamer, schemer, and a healer. Now, think about this a little bit. I back in the 80s, when I was working at my company in New York, we needed to get someone to come in and talk about leadership. We were concerned about some of our people. We want them to be great leaders. So we called in a wonderful industrial psychologist named Mortimer Feinberg. He had a great reputation. He did the first West Point cheating scandal. They brought him in to do that. And as I sat with Dr. Feinberg, it gave me some great thoughts on leadership. And I said, well, dreamer, reamer, schemer, healer. He said, well, look, Hugh, think about it this way. He said, think about the presidents in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Now, some of them had great characteristics, some didn't. He said, some had real strong characteristics. Who would you think in that time period was the dreamer? And of course, I struggled in fact, but the dreamer, of course, was Kennedy. Kennedy was, I dreamed of things that never, Kennedy was a great dreamer. He had thoughts. That was one of his great characteristics. The reamer during that time period was Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson could ream people. He could do it. He learned that in those old Texas back rooms of Texas politics, and he would just get right down on you. The schemer, of course, then, excuse me, was Richard Nixon, but his was dishonest scheming. We want to talk about honest scheming, and that's a great characteristic to have, honest scheming. And then the healer, back in those days, was Dwight Eisenhower with the big smile. You know, the war was over. He was trying to heal the people. And it would be great, though, if every leader had these four characteristics. pardon me, but you just don't see it at times. But dreamer, reamer, schemer, healer, something extremely important. Churchill certainly had all of these characteristics. He certainly had every one of these characteristics. Let me give you a little quiz now, so when you call in, you can give me the answers to this. I'd like to say, this is a rubber band. How is this rubber band like a great leader? Think about it. What is this rubber band like? A great leader should have all the characteristics of this rubber band. So when you call in and ask questions, I hope you'll tell me, well, let me tell you, I can tell you how a rubber band is like a leader. And great leaders also that I really, it's DWYP right every day. DWYP right every day. Great leaders have to DWYP right every day. Notice this, it reads the same forwards as it does backwards. And it simply means do what you promised you would do. Do what you promised you would do. That's how leaders build trust. And we see so many leaders that promise things and they never, ever follow through on those promises. And that's one of the greatest characteristics of a leader that you can find. If you think about what I've talked about so far, it's really all about leadership. You know, I've written a couple books. One of them, I guess, is why in the world did you write a book about giraffes? Well, giraffes are very much like great leaders. They stand head and shoulders above the crowd. And you certainly want a leader like Churchill, who stood head and shoulders above the crowd. They stick their necks out. They are not afraid to make decisions. Giraffes stick their necks out. And giraffes can reach things that normal animals can't. It's the same with great leaders. They reach things and get to places that other leaders can't get. Giraffes go long distances in short periods of time. So if you're going to be a great leader, you've got to move. You've got to keep going. You've got to be one of those leaders that make things happen. You want to make sure they make things happen. Giraffes have big hearts. Their heart weighs 28 pounds. It's 2.5 feet long. It's the biggest heart in the animal kingdom. And great leaders have big hearts. They care about the people. It's Churchill bringing the troops from Dunkirk, caring about the people that he leads. Giraffes are also very strong, but they are the kindest animal in the animal kingdom. And leaders have to be strong and powerful, but they also need to be calm. There's something else about leaders that I think are really, really important. There are 9 different species of giraffes. And you tell the difference in the species by the reticulation. Some are square, some are rounded, some are oblong. It just depends on that species of giraffes. But guess what? To the giraffe, there's no distinction among those 9. He or she doesn't care. He doesn't care if they're black, white, old, young. He just says they are just a giraffe. Wouldn't it be nice if all our leaders understood that there's no distinction between the colors, the ages, and what goes on. Very, very important. And giraffes are just phenomenal animals that care about their young and so forth. So I could go on with that a long time. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But if you're a great leader, let me say this to you. If you're a good leader, the team has confidence in you. If you are a great leader, the team has confidence in themselves. They know, because you've got them to believe that they believe in you and they can do it. That's what Churchill did in during the Blitz in London. Now, one final story I want to tell you. I'm going to run out of time here. One final story that I want to tell you about Churchill. It was not in the book, but this story is what the book is all about. It's a story that when the war was over, Churchill's secretary was called by the headmaster at one of the schools, Harrow. Now, Harrow is one of the boarding schools in London. There are two great boarding schools in London, Eton, E-T-O-N. If you do the crossword puzzle and it says great boarding school in London, it's 4 letters, it's Eton, E-T-O-N. But Churchill went to Harrow. Now, let me say this. Churchill was not a great student. That was not one of his great attributes. I always like to say his grades were like, when I went to VMI, I told people I had a 4.0 average, a 1, 1, 1, 1 for 4 years. And Churchill was kind of like that with his academics. But they wanted, the headmaster wanted Churchill to come in because Churchill had been at Harrow. So the headmaster went to all of his students and he said, look, we're going to have one of the world's greatest leaders come in to talk with you. And I want you to go out and buy new notebooks and new pads and pencils. You're going to take great notes from this man. This man has so much wisdom. Well, and the students listened to the headmaster. That's pretty interesting because most of the time they don't listen. But so they went out, they got all that papers and pencils. And the day came when Churchill went to Harrow. And the headmaster got up, and the headmaster's got to, he's got to introduce Churchill. Well, can you imagine introducing Winston Churchill? Oh, my Lord, probably took 20, 25 minutes to introduce Churchill. So he finally introduces Churchill, and Churchill gets up out of his, Churchill's sitting in the back. Now, this very rotund man with his glasses on his nose kind of ambles up front. And all the students are ready. They are ready. They've got the pencils out, boy, they've got the notebooks open. They're going to take all these notes. And Churchill looks out at this group of young men, many of them to be former leaders of the free world. And he looks at them and he says, never give in. Never, never, never. And he goes and he sits down. And the students are like, what happened here? Wow, what happened? Isn't that what this book is all about? Is about making sure that the people of London never gave in, that they believed that they could win this war. And that's what makes this book so special. And I want to tell you, it's been a delight to chat with you, to talk with you. Hope it didn't bore you. Didn't want to give you too much information about the book because I want you to read it. And I'll be glad to take any questions that you have. And I thank you for listening.